Hello and welcome back to Trackside Conversations. I'm your host, Alan Devlin. In episode 1, I shared my own journey through the railway industry, from apprentice maintainer through to programme leadership. In episode 2, we welcomed our first guest, Rob, from RPD, and explored their career, experiences and views on the future of the railway. And for this episode, those previous conversations feed into today's topic quite nicely. Over the last 25 years, the railway has taught me a huge amount. Some lessons came through success, some through mistakes, and some through opportunities I nearly didn't take. But many of the most valuable lessons came from the people I've been fortunate enough to work alongside. So today, I want to share 5 lessons that have had the biggest impact on me and my career. Let's get into it. Lesson 1. People deliver success, not plans. Early in my career, I generally believed success came down to having the perfect plan, the perfect process, the perfect programme. I thought that if everything was documented correctly and everyone followed the processes, success would naturally follow. Experience taught me otherwise. I remember being involved in projects where everything looked amazing on paper. The planning was complete, objectives were clear, resources were in place, and everyone knew what was expected. But as work progressed, communications between teams started to slip. Small misunderstandings became bigger issues, assumptions were made, information wasn't always shared at the right time, and before long, something that looked straightforward became far more complicated than anyone expected. What that taught me is that people make the difference. When teams trust each other, communicate openly, and pull in the same direction, amazing things can happen. When they don't, even the strongest plans can struggle. One of the things I love most about the railway is the variety of people it brings together. We have engineers, operators, maintainers, project professionals, planners, drivers. Everyone has a role to play, and every successful project I've ever been involved in has been built on strong relationships. If there's one thing I'd encourage anyone listening to invest in, it's the relationships you build along the way. Because in my experience, relationships solve problems faster than processes ever will. But relationships alone aren't enough. They need to be supported by good information, good decision making, and clear understanding of what's really happening. Which brings me on to lesson 2. Data is useless unless it drives action. One of the most rewarding parts of my career was working in fault analysis and reliability. At the time, we had access to huge amounts of information, failure reports, maintenance records, performance data, trend analysis. There was never a shortage of data. The challenge was knowing what to do with it. I spent countless hours analysing trends, looking for patterns, and trying to understand why certain failures kept occurring. What became clear very quickly was that data on its own doesn't improve anything. You can have the best dashboards, the most detailed reports, the most impressive spreadsheets, but if nobody acts on what they're seeing, nothing, and absolutely nothing changes. The real value comes when you combine data with experience, teamwork, and practical problem solving. That's where improvement happens. The lesson was simple. Data helps us understand where a problem exists. People are the ones who solve it. As our industry becomes increasingly digital, I think that lesson is more important than ever. Technology gives us information. People turn that information into action. And of course, turning information into action ultimately comes down to leadership, which leads nicely into lesson number 3. Leadership isn't a job title. When I first moved into leadership roles, I thought leaders were supposed to have all the answers. I thought leadership meant the most experienced person in the room, the person everyone turned to for solutions. However, over time I realised that That's not what great leadership looks like at all. I remember a period when a project was facing significant pressure and uncertainty. Deadlines were tight, challenges were appearing almost daily, and people were starting to feel the strain. The person who had the biggest positive influence on the team wasn't the most senior manager in the room. It was someone who constantly kept people informed, remained calm, listened to concerns, and helped others focus on solutions rather than problems. That experience taught me something important. Leadership isn't about hierarchy or where you sit in an organisation chart. It's about behaviours. Some of the best leaders I worked with weren't necessarily the most senior people. They were the people others naturally gravitated towards when things became difficult. The people who stayed calm under pressure, the people who listened, the people who supported others and helped teams move forward. I spoke to Rob in episode 2 about how I coach my daughter's under 10s girls football team, and I spoke about how even at that age group, I see leadership on the pitch. Within my workforce, I've seen apprentices demonstrate leadership. I've seen operators demonstrate leadership. I've seen maintainers demonstrate leadership. Because leadership isn't something that's handed to you with a job title. It's earned through actions and behaviours. For me, leadership is about creating clarity when things are uncertain, supporting people when challenges arise, and helping others succeed. It's a lesson I'm certainly still learning every day, and one thing I've noticed is that leadership often grows when we're willing to put ourselves into unfamiliar situations. Which brings me on to lesson number 4. Comfort zones are career limiters. If someone had told me as an apprentice where my career would eventually take me, I probably wouldn't have believed them. Every significant step I've taken involved a degree of uncertainty. Moving into fault analysis, moving into operations, taking on leadership responsibilities, stepping into business change, working on program delivery. None of those moves, absolutely none of them, felt comfortable at the time. In fact, some of them felt absolutely daunting. Like many people, I've had moments where I've questioned whether I was ready, whether I had enough experience, whether I was making the right decision. And if I'm honest, those feelings don't absolutely, completely just disappear. But when we're comfortable, we're usually relying on skills, knowledge, and experiences we've already developed. We know what to expect. We know how to solve the problems in front of us. And while there's nothing wrong with that, it doesn't necessarily stretch us as individuals. Growth, and I mean real growth, tends to happen when we're faced with something unfamiliar, a new role, a bigger responsibility, a different environment. A challenge that forces us to learn faster than we'd planned. That's when we develop new skills. That's when we build confidence. That's when we gain experience. And very importantly, that's when we discover that we are capable of more than we first thought. Looking back in my own career, every move that felt risky at the time ended up teaching me something valuable. Not because it was easy, but because it wasn't. The railway offers some incredible opportunities, but growth rarely comes from standing still. Often it's the opportunity that challenges the most that end up shaping us the most. And as we've seen across the industry over recent years, change isn't slowing down, which leads perfectly into the final lesson. The future of rail still depends on people. During my career, I've seen huge changes across the railway, new technology, new systems, new ways of working. Today we're talking about digital transformation, digital signalling, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics and automation. And rightly so. Technology is changing our industry at a remarkable pace. But despite all that change, one thing has remained constant. People. The future railway will still depend on leaders who inspire, teams who collaborate, engineers who innovate, operators who adapt, and apprentices who bring fresh ideas and new perspectives. Technology will undoubtedly change how we work, but it will never change why we work. At its heart, the railway remains a people business, and I think that's something worth remembering. When I look back in the last 25 years, the overwhelming feeling is gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunities I've had, the challenges I've faced, gratitude for the lessons I've learned, and most importantly, gratitude for the people I've met along the way. The railway has given me far more than a career. It's given me friendships, experiences, opportunities, and lessons that extend well beyond the workplace. The 5 lessons I've shared today certainly aren't the only lessons I've learned, but they're amongst the ones that have shaped me for the most. Genuinely, I'd love to hear about the lessons your own railway journey has taught you, whether you're an apprentice, maintainer, operator, engineer, project professional, driver, signaller, controller, planner, supplier, contractor, or someone working behind the scenes to keep the railway moving. Every journey contains valuable experiences and lessons worth sharing. Feel free to reach out through LinkedIn, Instagram, or email. I'd love to feature some of your stories and insights in a future episode. And if you're considering a career in rail, or you're just beginning your journey, I hope this episode shows how many opportunities this industry can offer. The railway has given me an incredible career, and I genuinely believe the best days of our industry are still ahead of us. After 25 years in the industry, one thing is clearer to me than ever. Trains move people, but people move the railway. Thank you for joining me for episode 3 of Trackside Conversations. If you've enjoyed today's episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could follow the podcast on Spotify, connect with me on LinkedIn, and share the podcast with colleagues across the industry. Until next time, I'm Devlin. Stay safe, and I'll see you trackside.